Welcome back to Razmafzar TV. I'm having Bede back on our channel. Hi Bede, nice to have you here.
It's good to be here.
Very good, Bede. We are going to talk about a very interesting topic again. We already talked about navak, arrowguide, but today we are going to talk to have a bit deeper one because we are going to talk about first of all general two types. One of them is navak, and one of them is navak-e qabze in Persian, right? And then we are going also to talk about different types of them, if there are any. I know that in navak there are, but maybe there are also of navak-e qabze some different types. Let us just concentrate. I give the floor to you. Please, first of all, in general, give a general description. What is a navak and what is a navak-e qabze? Then we go into specifications, please.
Okay. Well, both navak and navak-e qabze are methods of shooting a shorter arrow at full draw. So in European terms, they're overdraws. They're a method of drawing the arrow head back inside the bow itself. The two classifications, they both use the same word, navak, which is a channel or a guide. But one of them is basically it's a stick with a groove down one side, the outside, something to hold on to, and you can take it and draw a very short arrow or a medium short arrow to full draw, which means it gets the full impact of the power of the bow. And traditionally, the darts are not light. They're not very lightweight. Experience tells me if you make the dart too light, it will break the bow. You've got to have some mass there to absorb the energy. The other is the navak-e qabze, which is a small metal groove that acts like the Turkish bilek siperi, except instead of being worn on the hand, it's actually tied to the bow, not permanently.
Do you also later on, I know it's not a topic of today, just to show our viewers, can you also show later on the bilek siperi?
Yeah, I have one in the hall.
Okay, so we can discuss about that. So then our viewers who are not familiar with these devices can see a difference between them, and we can also maybe talk about that one, right?
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah. Well, when I go to get it, if you want to do it in this one, just pause the video and I'll go and get it and come back and show
Yes,
you.
perfect, excellent. Okay, let us just first of all go back to navak. Okay.
Yeah.
So navak is mostly I say made of wood. Am I correct?
Yeah.
And then, as you have shown, it has a channel. So this channel, in order to keep the arrow inside, just correct me if I'm wrong, should have edges which turn towards the middle of the channel. Am I correct or am I wrong?
That is one of the most common ways of building an arrow guide.
Yes.
And that type of arrow guide is probably responsible for the theory that arrow guides don't shoot as fast as they should. When I make arrow guides, I don't have the channel completely overlapping.
Yes.
And the reason I do that is when you put an arrow in it or a dart, tiri navak, I want it so that when I'm holding it, the bowstring going through the nock is just touching the sides. That gives me stability. It keeps the arrow guide at the right angle when I shoot. Now, if the sides curve over, which they do in a lot of arrow guides, and this is mentioned in Arab archery and Korean arrow guides are made that way, generally speaking. In Korea, they actually make the part just behind the point of the arrow a little bit thicker, so when you slide it in the groove, it can't pop out by itself. The only place it can get out is the end. Now, that's very safe, comparatively speaking. but the problem with it is that in my arrow guide, I don't know if you can see this.
Yeah.
The arrow is half in the guide and half out. So
Yeah.
when the string is pushing the arrow along the guide, it doesn't necessarily touch the sides of the guide at all. It only touches in the beginning. And that means there's less friction. The arrow goes faster. It's harder to see in flight and it hits harder. So
A question, Bede. Isn't
yeah,
it a danger that the dart, I mean, or the short arrow might fall off from the
there is.
side?
And the way that is prevented is keeping the point in the groove. Now, I don't know whether you can see it, but the point is about 3/4 in the groove. So when the dart is traveling along with the bowstring, the point stays in the groove. Now, it's sideways, right? Now, how would it fall out? It falls out through gravity.
True.
Now, gravity has a value, which is what, 9.83 meters per second. That's the acceleration due to gravity. So if you have a dart that's moving fast enough, it doesn't have time to fall out. So therefore, if you shoot one of these guides, and I'm not talking about the ones where they curl over a little bit, but one of these that are basically open, with too weak a bow, by which I mean a bow below 30 pounds, the arrow might fall out.
Yeah.
Because the time it takes to get from one end of the guide to the other, it may have dropped. But
Yeah.
before I built the very first guide I made, because there was one picture of a guide. This was before people in Korea started making them again, because I'm very old. There was one guide in the Ingo Simon collection in England that had been published. There was one or two guides published in Boots, 1930s article on Korean archery, but they were very, very unknown. And so I sat down with a calculator and worked out how fast the arrow had to be going to mean that it was out of the end of the guide before it dropped out of the groove. So bear in mind, when you're shooting, the groove is like that.
Yeah.
So as the arrow comes along, you want it not to be there, you want it to be there. And the primary check you do when you shoot one of these guides, or I do anyway, because I've managed to keep all my fingers over the years, is to make sure that when you're back here, the arrowhead is in the groove. You can just check it as you're shooting, not pointing out like that. If it's pointing out, things can go wrong. So you stop and you reset. The drop on a, say, 150 feet per second arrow is like a millimeter over the length of a guide. It's not going to fall out. Primarily, not on, I didn't do this on purpose. I made the guides the way I made them because I didn't have access to very straight bamboo to make them like a bamboo guide. And making the curve over was a lot more difficult under those circumstances. I can do it now. And I should make some like that. Some people have got me making guides. I've got 8 in construction at the moment. And I think it's not a bad thing for safety, but it's not a good thing for distance. And when I was this guide, I think I took this to America for fun, for a flight shooting competition. I wasn't going to use it. And we had this unique thing. It was the first time they decided to use modern Asiatic bows, by which they meant bows that look like Asiatic bows, but were made with modern materials. So not original hornets in your bows and things like that. And I asked whether we could do a round with the navak. And they said, well, why not? But it's not going to shoot as far because of all the drag. But they didn't know that I'd actually designed it to minimize the drag. So the result was it shot about 25% further than a light arrow. a flight style arrow. And that, you know, that wasn't an optimized arrow. I was just using some arrows I had for a modern flight bow, which has a long overdraw and a short draw and whatever. So with arrows properly constructed, particularly the distance from that guide, it would have shot better. But a 45-pound off-the-shelf Korean bow was shooting maybe 360 meters. And it was shooting straight. At 360 meters, the spread of the arrows, particularly the two that went the furthest, they were only about 3 meters apart.
Yeah.
Which is impressive. And that was without any practice at that distance. So cold, just shooting cold. So I was happy with that design. There is a much safer design.
Which design, Pete?
This is what Taibucha in the book translated as Saracen Archery calls a Shah Majra.
Yes.
Now,
could you explain Shah Majra to us?
Yeah, I've got one on a bow behind me somewhere. Oh no, it's over there. All right. This is going to look very clumsy. That's because it is very clumsy. So basically what you have is you have a slot that goes completely through the guide, which has the hole down the center. So the bowstring goes through from the top out the bottom. And what you do to shoot, same thing, you drop an arrow in the slot at the top, which at one end is a bit wider than it is at the other end. And I mean, you can just use a regular guide arrow and slide it in. I've got to be very careful because I'm in my house and I don't want to shoot a hole through the wall or anything, or the window. Just knock it on.
Do you have, in Australia, do you have American walls or European walls?
Double brick walls here.
So it's European, so you don't need to worry.
No, I only have to worry about the window. So therefore, as you can see, the arrow is completely hidden. You can just see a bit of feather. You can draw this back and shoot. Now,
oh, that's wonderful. This
yeah,
is a wonderful design.
So I thought, we were talking about the Panjagan.
Yes.
And we were discussing about shooting multiple arrows, and that the man who has the Damen ring website in Germany, I think he's made arrow guides for you. He made one that shot stacked arrows.
Yes.
One here, one here. So I made something like that, and that worked fine. So I was quite happy with that. And then I thought, well, if you don't need a nock, what about making arrows that don't have a nock? And then you could put them in. You could get the feathers in, and you could use the top feather, and this is four-fletched, use the top feather and the bottom feather to make sure they stayed in the right place in the guide. And that seemed like such a good idea at the time. It did not work.
Why?
Because the side feathers, it was almost impossible to get them into the groove. So the process of shooting one dart would take as long as it took a European crossbowman to span a crossbow. So the best thing I could do was slide it in, turn it, slide it as far forward as I can, and then slide it backwards. And it never really worked properly. So nocks work. If you're going to shoot nockless arrows, what I did was I put cartridges, empty cartridge casings from bullets on the back of the arrow to stop it from splitting. And that was slightly wider than the arrow itself was. No problem. But with those, the string would slip around the edge of the arrow and drive the arrow sideways against the guide, and the string would be driven into the guide itself. So I think it can be done.
Just a second, please. Just a second with Shah Majra, Beat. Before I forget, can you make me a Shah Majra?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, very good. Very good.
This string is...
B, did we find about Shah Majra in the translations of manuscripts we worked on?
No, not specifically. some of the descriptions, I think, they were general. They were talking about the general type of Majra. I don't know why. For some reason, of the two Arabic manuals we have translated, both of them spent a lot of time talking about Majra Navak. There's the third one, which isn't a manual, just some archery, the one by Mahdi Tasusi.
Tasusi, yeah.
That also mentions Majras, but it's the same level as in the Persian ones. You get the impression, and this may be a wrong impression, but this wasn't taught to everybody. This might have been one of those advanced techniques. A lot of the manuals are to teach, well, not to teach you, but to reinforce, because they expected you to have a proper teacher to reinforce the things you learned from your teacher. And a lot of it's basic, some of it's advanced, some like, Khatra is advanced. But the Persian manuals are more balanced in the sense that they give more details and make it easier to understand. The Arabic ones are incredibly detailed, so that if you already understand what it's about, you can learn a lot from the Arabic manuals too. And the Turkish are the same. Persian and Turkish, I think, are closer to each other in terms of their focus and how they explain things. But they're all useful. And since there's more descriptions of Persians using navaks in Arabic literature than there is in Persian literature so far, I think there's a biologist on YouTube that says, and this is the such and such as we know it. Well, you keep finding new manuscripts, so one of these days we're going to find one that has every detail in it, and possibly even geographically specific, and saying, I live here in Tabriz, this is how we use this.
To be honest with you, I think I told you I have been so busy supervising theses at the university, and also research projects, writing. But I have 4 new archery manuals to translate. One of them, you will love it, is over 200 pages, but written in Hafiz style.
As a poem.
Yeah.
This seems to be quite common.
Yeah, but the thing is, that I'm good at translations, but so far I haven't translated. Here and there some poems, that. But the whole thing is in poems and a language of mystery. But it describes, again, archery, but I have to do it because it's important, Bede. But one thing which is important.
Honestly, I think the reason so many archery manuscripts, and some of the ones we've already worked on, had pieces of poetry all the way through them.
Yes.
Is that poetry is easy to remember.
Yes.
You can't always carry a book around you. There was no internet. So if you had a book that you could memorize sections of.
But I'm sorry, can I challenge your idea? Are you sure there was no internet in the 10th century?
Well, we know the Assyrians had tablets.
Exactly, good point.
If you look at some of the Assyrian bas reliefs, they appear to be wearing wristwatches.
Yes. I think, the new finds show that Achaemenid were using mobile phones.
Those gold dishes were actually for reception.
Lost technology. No, do not
what's going to happen? Somebody on the internet's going to cut part of this thing out and say, look, these guys say it's true.
Yeah, you're right. Okay.
I think I believe there's been a number of historical documentaries made where they brought in experts and then basically cut out the beginning and the end and just used a few sentences in the middle to advance their idea. And the experts are going, hey, we didn't say it like that.
Yeah, they are right.
It's difficult. When I say experts, I mean...
and this is in poem, but this is in poem. But then, like in the text we went through, all those articles we published on archery, every now and then the author, who is not known, says, and everyone knows it.
Oh yeah.
This is a man explain what does it mean, and everyone knows it.
This is what I was saying before. You learnt from your teacher, and the book is just a reinforcement of what you already know.
Yeah.
It's not meant to be a manual, like, here's a manual for fixing this car. Even if you don't know how the car works, the manual will tell you where all the bolts are and where the electric. But in archery manuals, they assume somebody had already taught you. And this is just to refine your knowledge. And it's not true. I was rereading Justin and Jay's translation of Gao Ying. And he's got bits in. Gao Ying was a wonderful author in the sense he's so polemical. He hates everybody else because they're doing everything wrong in their archery. And but it's very detailed.
Yeah.
So you can actually understand what he's talking about.
Yes.
Whereas some of the ones that you translated and we worked on, I could clearly see, I mean, because I'd read stuff from Turkish archery and Arabic archery, I could put together what they were talking about.
Yeah.
But if you hadn't, it would be incredibly difficult to understand what they were talking about.
Yes.
And I mean, there's still things. Shaped like a ladle is one of the phrases I remember. We still don't know what they mean. I mean, we know what a ladle is. We know what shape of a ladle is. But how did it relate to the subject they were talking about? I don't know. I don't think we ever worked that one out. One day, one of these manuscripts is going to explain that the ladle you use for putting spice into such and such has the same shape as the nock of an arrow from one side.
Yes.
And that's what they're talking about. We don't know until we find it or somebody else finds it. I mean, that's the good thing. When you do stuff like this, it's not just what you find out. You encourage other people.
Yes, absolutely.
And the more careful you are, or we are, the better example we give to other people to be careful too, instead of just leaping to conclusions, which can be very dangerous.
Back to the navak. So we have navak or majra. So you've shown that the general shape. Then you Shah Majra, which goes, the string goes in between. The material is wood. Do we know historically first what type of wood they used?
They preferred hardwoods. I've tried both hardwoods and softwoods. So these ones are pine.
A pine.
And so this one is pine. It's been painted. It's been used for about 30 years, and it's fine. I made one out of
just a question. Describe for us, what do you consider a hardwood and what do you consider a softwood?
Okay, it doesn't directly relate to the physical properties of the wood. Hardwood refers to wood from evergreen trees like oaks and ash and things like that. And softwood refers to wood from coniferous trees, pine and that kind of thing. That's why technically balsa, which is incredibly soft, is a hardwood because it comes from an evergreen tree. So it's possibly misleading. I think I've got one here made out of cherry, which is technically a hardwood. I've got a few hanging here on my little hook. Try and get these off. Okay. All right.
Well, you have a collection of these. Wonderful.
Well, I've been experimenting. So this is a bamboo one.
Also, you can use bamboo.
Yeah. And the bamboo ones are the ones most likely to have the rolled over edges because it's really easy to do that with bamboo.
Yes, it's easy, of course. Of course.
This one is cherry. You notice it's beautiful. Much, than the other one because cherry is much harder. It is a harder hardwood. Actually, you can use cherry in the ears of bows up to about 50 or 60.
Hold on. Is cherry evergreen tree?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm not good at biology. That's why I'm asking you.
Well, it's technically it's a deciduous tree, so
Okay,
it's not evergreen. Maybe I'm being imprecise.
okay.
Uh, but the real difference is between coniferous trees and all the rest.
Okay. Um,
So
okay, Pete, just one thing. Have you, just before we go ahead, have you ever used ebony to make one of them?
no, I've used ebony to make nocks for arrows, but
Why didn't
I've
you use one for making a navak?
yes, you could. Ebony is a very dense wood.
It is.
To get a piece that was long enough to make a navak with straight grain might be difficult these days because a lot of the trees have been cut down to make piano keys and whatnot.
Exactly.
Um, there's different types of ebony too. The biggest piece I ever got was about that long, which is obviously too short to make
Yeah.
an arrowguide out of.
Is it a
Um,
protected species? No.
I think there's a small number of ebony species. See, there's true ebony and false ebony. There's all kinds of things that are getting very, very hard to find in the wild. And the trees
Mm.
often are only quite small.
Yes,
Now,
yes.
one wood that you might be able to get big enough pieces to make arrowguides out of that's exceptionally hard is Brazil wood, which is
Oh,
what
that's right.
the nocks of Turkish arrows are made out of. Now, I've got pieces, but they're only that long. It is incredibly hard. It's very heavy too. Um, it's hard, heavy, and strong.
Where
If
can
you
you
made
source these woods, Bede? Where can you
well
source them?
in Australia, there are timber merchants that specialize in exotic woods.
Oh, okay.
Um,
Mm,
a lot of things you can order on the internet.
mm,
Um, but me, I used to go to timber and carpentry shows. So these are big exhibitions, and I'd always be looking for woods I'd read about in old books. And therefore, if I saw some, I'd buy it, and then
true.
I'd try it out and see if it worked. I mean, I
Mm,
oh, I'm sorry, I hit the microphone. Then I've got a little piece of wood over here.
mhm.
Now, this is two pieces of a very dense wood that are glued together like
What?
that.
Why did you glue them together?
I'm going to glue this onto the ends of several arrows and cut it out to make Turkish style nocks.
Oh,
And it basically the
mm.
grain is going in like that. So when you cut the nock through it, the grain is moving in like that, so it's not likely to snap.
Ah, that's right. That's right.
And that's why the Turks did it. They could make a much stronger nock without using super heavy wood. This is mulga, which is a type of acacia, and acacia roots are really strong and hard, and you can make amazing things out of them.
Yes.
Um,
Um. Okay, Pete. So different types of wood we use for making Majra, Navak, or Shah Navak or Shah Majra. Now, can I use metals? Or
yeah,
did they use metals or can back then? Or can we now, even if they didn't use metals to make one?
no, they definitely did. It's documented. They use metals for particular purposes. One of the little navak arrows that I have, old ones, has a kind of small broadhead in it, which if you shot through even a hardwood one, it would gradually cut
Yeah.
grooves in it and it would fall apart. But they talk about making navak-majra out of copper and iron.
Mm.
So
Have you made
basically,
one? Have you made one?
I've made one out of aluminium because I had some already in a U-shaped groove. So I just had to trim down the back and put some holes, and it
Okay.
worked perfectly well. It was a bit noisier, but that was way back. That's 30 or 40 years ago. I didn't go back to it because the real purpose I'd made it for was to see if you could shoot solid metal arrows out of it. So the whole thing is forged in one piece.
Mm.
And you could. It worked quite well. So the theory is that you would make a metal arrow and either glue a horn knock onto it or cut a knock into the metal. I think they preferred putting separate knocks onto it. Taper the point like a bodkin. So if you shot this at somebody, it would weigh maybe as much as a full-sized arrow. You're shooting it from the same bow you'd shoot that arrow from. The difference is because it's smaller and a smaller diameter, it has less drag, so it goes a little bit further. But it's got the same mass, so when it hits really hard. And so they were considered quite useful against helmets and things like that. They were accurate as far as I can tell. I've got some thick, like 1/4-inch piano wire, which would be perfect for making these. I should cut a few pieces out. It's the time I spend cutting because I don't have the appropriate tools for it. But it would be worthwhile trying. And of course, the other thing that they use them for, which is very, very interesting, is you would have a little brazier next to where you were shooting, and you would have an assistant. And he would heat the tip of the arrow until it was red hot. Then you'd prepare the arrow guide. He'd use a pair of pliers to insert it into the arrow guide, and then you'd shoot it, which meant you shot a red hot piece of iron into, say, a wooden part of a wall or something. And if that wasn't enough, you could also shoot arrows. They weren't arrow guide type arrows. They were captive arrows, which had a funnel on the front. And they used to get eggs and empty out the yolk and fill them with naphtha, which is flammable petroleum product, very common in the Middle East. That would splash on the wooden hoarding. And then you'd shoot these red hot iron arrows into it. And of course, they hit so hard that you'd need a pair of special pliers to pull them out of the wood. So nobody's going to lean over while they're shooting these arrows at you to pull something out of the wood. So they would start burning deep inside the wood.
Just a question for you. You wanted to make this experiment. Remember, we talked about it.
Yeah. I haven't been brave enough to try, and it's been too hot here. This is something to do in winter in Australia, particularly if it's raining, because we don't like starting forest fires here.
Oh, that's right. You have these problems. You told me once. Right? It's not like in Germany raining all the time. Yes, it's great.
No. Though, as I told you before, I've been picking mangoes at a tremendous rate from the mango tree in my neighbor's backyard. 70 mangoes so far.
This is unbelievable for us living in Central Europe that you can go and pick up mango from a tree. I cannot even imagine that.
Yeah. Well, they've turned out to be I've been taking them to friends and to my archery club, just giving people mangoes. Yeah, have a mango.
Okay, so this you can make metal made of copper, made of iron. So we have two different types of wood: softwood, hardwood. You explained also them. So we know why. And then we talked about, two different types. We can have maybe 3 different types. Let's say, no, 2 different major types: Shah Majra and Majra, navak or Shah navak. And then the navak, then you can have the edges shaped differently. And then we come to tira navak, a famed question. Does a tira navak, is it like, do they have feathers, plumes, or can be also used without any feathers?
Okay. Well, that was something I tried out.
Can you show us one of them, a tira navak, so people see that again?
Yeah, okay. Where did I put it back in here? So it's basically an arrow, roughly the same diameter as a regular arrow, but half or less the size. So I don't know if I've got any really small ones in here. I think I do. It's right. So this one, you can see, you can make them really small.
Yeah.
And their effect, the medium-sized ones, which in Arabic are probably called husban. We've gone through this and looked at various things discussing this, and the way the names work out. This will be in the paper that I'm submitting. Is interesting because they contradict each other. The little ones should be called locusts or little birds, and the bigger ones should be husban, which means hailstone, I think. So these are just like regular arrows. The fletching is different. On a regular arrow, oh, wait a minute, I'll get a shorter one because it's easy to fit into the screen. On a regular arrow in the Middle East, when you look at the knock, I'm going to try and get this right.
Okay.
There's one feather that's pointing straight up and down, and
I see
two
that,
coming out
yes.
to the side, right? That's the Middle Eastern style, and some of the arrows from Jura Europos showed that, and some showed the other style. This is the Western style, where let me get that right, where one feather is pointing at right angles to the slot of the nock, and the other two are at equal distances. Now, on an arrow guide, regularly speaking, you put that feather inside the groove and have the other two sticking out from the groove, and that feather gets crushed. But when you shoot it, it just pops back up. I mean, I've got half a dozen of these here, and they've been shot multiple times, and the feathers aren't damaged at all. So from that point of view,
sometimes Bede, when you shoot, I don't know, is it me? I could smell something like burned stuff. Could it be?
it could be what's used to treat the wood. So it's getting heated by the passage of the arrowhead over it, and it could just release something. So, yeah, it's possible. It's not from burning, but remember the arrow's traveling, pardon me, the arrow's traveling at about, by the time it gets to the end of the guide, the tip of the arrow is traveling maybe 180 feet per second.
Yeah, of course.
Really fast. And depending on the shape of the arrowhead, this could actually, cause issues.
Yes.
I find, in general, just see if I've got another one here. Okay. They're roughly the same size. See the difference in the size of the fletching? This one shoots just as accurately as the one with the bigger feathers. So the first time I shot this, because this is one of the advantages of arrow guides, is you can make arrows from broken arrows. So this is a broken flight arrow, the back end of a broken flight arrow. And I cut off the damaged part and put a point on it.
Can you shoot one without any feathers?
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
My very short ones, which are about that long, have no feathers.
Yes.
And they shoot perfectly well because they've got a heavy head, so they're balanced very far forward of center. I shot some ones of roughly this length. When we were flight shooting, I had 4 arrows with feathers and 2 without feathers. And the 2 without feathers went further than the ones with feathers, and they still landed point first in the ground. So they didn't tumble or anything, because I think the guide gives them enough stability. So you don't get an archer's paradox with these because they're too short to bend very much. Like bending is, if something is half a meter long and it's got X stiffness, if you make it a meter long, it has half X stiffness, double the, it's an inverse relationship. So my feeling is that unfletched guide arrows are useful, more useful at long range than fletching. If there's something wrong with the path, like for instance, there's a slight kink in the guide and it leaves at a slight angle, fletching will straighten it out. In guide, arrows are usually shot at distances of greater than 100 meters.
Oh, okay.
Because that's when you can't see them coming. And at 100 meters, someone standing with a bow at full draw holding one of these, it looks like an arrow. You're too far away to realize it's twice as thick.
Yeah. Too
And
far
when
away.
you release the little dart coming out, it's just a dot. You cannot see it against a group of people.
No, you can't.
So my feeling is that the actual descriptions of these in use often refer to shooting from the walls of cities.
Yeah.
Down on people approaching who have got shields and armor. And because these things are going so fast, they often punch through armor that a bigger arrow doesn't go through. Because even though they're smaller, they're not a lot less in weight. So one of these weighs, I don't know, I think this is about 380, 400 grains, which is roughly the same weight as a target arrow, a full-length target arrow.
Yeah, that's right. It is.
So, I mean, you know, they're carrying momentum. They're traveling fast. They're hard to see. And, of course, because they're just like an ordinary arrow, you can just pop up and wait, you know, get ready. The guy puts his head above his shield and just go bang, shooting, which is what happened to somebody in Kandahar or something. This is in Mubarak Shah, Adab al-Har.
Yes,
he's got all these little tales of people being shot, and there are a couple of being shot with arrowguides. I think one guy got shot through the helmet.
You mean in Adab al-Harb Shuja'i, Mubarak Shah? Yeah,
yeah. So, yes. I mean, you know, it was a real thing. Yeah. I mean, we don't think about this because it's not commonplace anymore. But during the when the sepoys in the East India Company revolted in the 1850s, I think it was at the Siege of Lucknow. Some of the defenders on the walls fighting the British were using bows and arrows.
Yeah.
And they were clearly trained, because what people said was, as soon as someone popped their head above the trenches or whatever they had for their besieging of the city walls, somebody would shoot them.
Yeah, of course.
Just bang. And there's at least one occasion of an arrow going through someone's skull.
Yes, of course.
So the force of just regular archery is often underestimated, because most things today are trying to work out whether you can shoot a longbow arrow through a piece of plate armor. Whereas most people who were shot by arrows, they weren't aiming for the armor, they were aiming for their face or an exposed limb or something like that, or a hand.
You know, this is something, excuse me that you bring it up, I would like to mention that. It is something, you know, because people, you know, it's really interesting that you mentioned that. They come and then shoot, no bow can penetrate that. They do it also with swords. Shamsher cannot go through this plate armor but the armor, first of all, is not a tournament armor, which is so heavy, you know, the Europeans use. And second, like in today's warfare, you have an armor, they keep shooting at you, and then there is an opening, you get killed. That's the whole idea of that. Well, be it with the sword or with an arrow, with a bow. And I don't even understand the purpose of these tests. Oh, no Shamsher can cut through this. Yeah, of course not. But they have an armor, they keep fighting. And when there is an opening, then they get killed. I mean, this is not that he goes banging on a piece of metal the whole time.
Yeah. Well, the classic example of this is in English history. Henry V, when he was 16 years old, and before he was crowned king, yes. In the middle of a battle, lifted his visor up because he was hot, and someone shot him in the face.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, true.
Because there was a surgeon who was able to extract the arrowhead without killing him, which was impressive. But this is it. It's when you're not paying attention. I don't know how true this was in the old days, but I've seen references to like modern troops going into battle and discarding things like bulletproof vests because they were too hot to wear.
Yeah.
And I mean, so people didn't always have all the equipment that the rich people had.
Yes. True. Pete, I think I lost you.
I mean, breathing in a closed helmet is not a trivial action.
Oh,
And
yeah.
the loss of vision.
Yeah.
I mean, you just got to think about. I mean, we know about the beautiful masks that were sometimes used with Persian helmets, and turned up in the Golden Horde in burials, but that wasn't that common. I mean, we know it's illustrated in a few miniatures in that, and they certainly would have been a good defense against arrows at a long distance. But they're so uncomfortable to wear for more than 15 minutes.
Yeah, of course.
And I mean, our ancestors were human beings just like us. And you get, if you're, I think one of the great uses of archery in warfare was to keep people cooped up in their armor so that they got really uncomfortable and made bad decisions. Like, we can't stand this anymore, let's charge, when there was an ambush set up for them or something like that.
Yes.
I mean, even the reporting on what the English did in the 100 Years' War and the Wars of the Roses tends to be either so pro archer it's unbelievable, or so pro armored man at arms that it's equally unbelievable. Both were being used. And when you go to Iran, where you've got heavily armed cavalry with lightly armed cavalry,
Yeah.
usually both have bows, but the guys with the lances and the maces and the Jorshan and that were probably there to charge into the other group and hack them apart once the archers disorganized them. And whereas horse armor was well known, barding was well known.
Yes.
It's a lot more expensive. There's a lot more metal in a horse armor than there is in a man's armor.
Yeah.
And a lot of the paintings show horses with no armor at all. So unless you were fighting someone who was determined to steal your horse, which I'm not saying didn't happen, then the biggest vulnerability is the horse.
Is the horse, yes.
And when you look at it, what arms did people carry on their bodies that they would retain if they fell off their horse? Their dagger, their sword, their bow case, and their quiver. If they carried a mace, it was under their leg.
Yes.
On the saddle. So if they fell off the horse, the mace fell off too. But
yes,
if you fell off your horse and you still had bows and arrows and swords and daggers, you're still going pretty well. If your shield was tied over your back, even if you weren't using it, when you fell off your horse, you still had a shield.
Yes, absolutely.
But a lot of the other stuff, it was useful. If you're riding along with a mace and you whack some guy standing on the ground on the back of the head, he's out of it. Doesn't matter how good his helmet is, he's concussed, he's down on the ground, he's gone.
Yeah, he's gone.
But if you're standing your ground on foot,
yes,
maybe a mace isn't as useful. I mean, you've got videos of how to use a mace with a shield and things like that. So, I mean, it wasn't useless.
No.
But, maybe not as useful.
Okay, let's go to the next one, please. The next one. Let's go through the navak-e qabze and explain the concept of navak-e qabze to us, please.
Okay, well, essentially, it is a groove.
Yes.
It's made out of metal, in this case, copper.
Mm-hmm.
That means that if you have small broadheads, they will not damage it. You'll end up with scratches, but you can just polish those out. And it has a tongue. And the purpose of this tongue, I will pick up a bow, which I have just here, and I will try and get it untangled from the other bow, which definitely didn't want me to do anything like that. So here's a bow. There's the arrow pass. So the point of this is to have it attached to the bow at the arrow pass there, which means you can pull an arrow like
How
this
do you
one.
attach it, Pete?
Oh, I will show you in a second. you can pull an arrow all the way back here.
Yeah.
So that's how it gives you the overdraw. Attachment is really simple. You take a thong, piece of leather or a piece of cloth. You wrap it round the arrow pass of the bow. The reason you're doing this first is to give that metal piece something to rest against that isn't your valuable bow. And I mean, obviously, this takes a bit of time. You do this when you've got the time to do it. I don't think you ever shot these from horseback. I mean, you could if you were really skilled, but it's a lot of work. So you've got this wrapped round, and then you take your navak-e qabze, you position it where you think it should be positioned, and then you wrap this around the tongue, the protruding tongue. And the idea is it's fairly firmly attached, but it's got enough flexibility.
Yeah.
It's actually quite hard to do this. It's good in sunlight. It's really easy to do in sunlight. So it's got enough flexibility. You can adjust the angle slightly.
Yeah.
And in general, you want it to be pointing slightly in towards, I think I can show this, slightly in towards the center of the bowstring.
Yes.
Now, I'm going to just roughly tie this off. Because we're not actually going to shoot this in my lounge room, because it would not, my household insurance does not cover shooting navak-e qabze in the lounge room. So I'm tying it on. I adjust it by pulling it round. Now, once I'm ready to shoot, I can move it up and down. It protrudes a lot further forward than webshop would.
Okay.
They actually start from here and go back. This actually goes all the way along. So that means that when I'm not going to, well, maybe I am, because I'm really very stupid. So if I get that in the correct angle, so you just draw, and that has some of the advantages of the regular navak.
Yeah.
Less chance of things going wrong. You're using a longer arrow.
Yeah.
And it's actually easier to shoot a small broadhead out of it than it is in a arrowguide. It's tied onto the bow, so you'd think, well, that's a bit of a problem. What if you suddenly want to shoot a long arrow?
Yeah.
You can shoot a long arrow off it just as easily, because you just have to put it on the string and just shoot normal. The only trick with these is, again, on an orientally fletched arrow, you have one feather up. Well, when you shoot out of either a webshop or a navak, you have that feather down.
Yeah.
So that it will slide smoothly across the groove.
Yeah.
And the other two feathers are out of the way. If you have it the way you'd normally shoot with one up, I think actually on this one the nocks move. See if I've got one where the nocks in the right place. Great advantage of plastic nocks like this is you can readjust them. That's better. So if you have it with the feather up and it goes along here, one side feather is going to catch on the edge of the groove. But if you're shooting with one down, the down feather actually enters the groove before it can catch on the edge, so it doesn't get damaged. So these are interesting to shoot. It took me a while to find out that you actually had to have them tilted a bit down at the back.
Yeah.
Because I was having all kinds of problems when I first shot these. They would go flying off. You also want to use a grip either with your index finger completely behind the bow and your thumb perfect. Well, all Persian manuals say you hold your thumb perfectly horizontal, but you adjust this until it's just right. you use a standard grip and a standard draw, and they work pretty well. They shoot slightly to the right.
Yeah.
There's no bending of the arrow around the bow.
Yeah.
But it's almost like a sight, that little U shape. It's
Yeah.
quite easy to aim. They're
Mhm.
and they're relatively straightforward to make. I make mine out of just regular copper water pipe.
Yeah.
I think you could even make them out of plastic conduit and just use heat to straighten it and curve. I should actually make an extra one for you out of that. I'll test it to make sure it's safe first. It is not safe to make regular navak out of plastic conduit. And the reason
Could you
it's not,
explain why not for our viewers, please?
what happens is, because my very first one I made out of plastic conduit, I cut it down lengthways, and I had my perfect half groove,
Yes.
and I shot it. And sometimes the arrows went over there, and sometimes they went over there, and I didn't know what was going on until I was shooting at a range, and someone says, "Do you know how much that bends when you shoot it?" So what was happening was I was shooting it, and it was bending like that, and sometimes the arrow fell out. Not because so much of the gravity, is because it popped out because this thing bent so much. So that's when I started using wooden ones, and all my wooden ones, wrong way around. All of my wooden ones, the side in towards the bow is thicker to stop it from bending. There's not very much pressure on it. They don't have to be super strong, but it makes a difference.
Yeah,
and I feel that, as I say, conduit is strong enough to make a navak-e qabze out of, but it's not strong enough to make a regular arrowguide. I've seen people on the internet shooting with them, and they're very brave. And I hope they don't get injured. But really, I got so close to being injured that it scared me away from it, until a friend offered to cut the groove in the wood for me with a router. I didn't know where I was going to go with this, because I couldn't get the bamboo, and the conduit came in a standard thickness. I couldn't get it thicker. But for a navak-e, even if you were making a bilek saperi and you didn't have horn, or you didn't think you could carve the wood, it's quite easy to make the groove out of PVC pipe and then just paint it, because it'll be strong enough.
Yeah.
And very cheap.
Yeah, of course, of course. Okay, if I come here and ask you a question, what would you prefer? Do you prefer a navak, Shah Majra, or a navak-e qabze?
Okay. I believe that the regular navak is more flexible in terms of the types of things you can shoot out of it.
Yes.
The navak-e qabze is basically, you can shoot arrows that are about a fist, or maybe 1.5 fists shorter than your regular arrow, but that's it. You can shoot small broadheads, so that's an advantage.
Yeah.
The Shah Majra, greatest advantage is for safety. Greatest disadvantage is it is so slow to load arrows.
Yes.
And it's so much more bulky. This is really quite a small one compared to some of the ones I've seen online. It's my feeling that if it's too big to put in your quiver, you're not going to take it with you. I've seen a quiver in the Grayson collection in the University of Columbia, Missouri. This is a quiver built specifically for navaks, possibly in Mongolia, maybe in the northern part of Korea, or Jilin province in China. And it had a slot on the back of the quiver that was just wide enough to take a navak this big. And this is a very narrow navak. And it was designed to hold something like 40 or 50 little arrows and a navak in its own slot in the back of the quiver. And I thought, well, that shows you that they valued ease of transport and use. A navak that was too big or too bulky would not be popular with the troops. And of course, people like to show off how skillful they were. I
Of
mean,
course.
every time I shoot a navak, I'm absolutely terrified that I'm going to have an accident because so many people have. It's a regular event in Korea, I've heard from Professor Tom Duvernay. That might be not true now. Maybe they're much better at it. This was 10 years ago or 15 years ago or something like that. But I can see how things can go wrong. I made one experiment shooting with a very light bow, this one, which is only about 18 or 20 pound. It's about at full draw for me, it's about 20 pound. It's great for practicing shooting close range with unfletched arrows to develop your form and get your body aligned and everything. But you try and shoot a navak with it and the arrow will fall out because the string is not moving fast enough. You can shoot it with a bilek siperi and you can shoot it with a navak-e qabze because they're under the arrow. Like, you know, when I'm shooting this, the guide is, the arrow is, oh, this is going to be dangerous. I'm trying not to shoot my computer. The guide is under the arrow. So it doesn't matter how fast the arrow is going, it'll still shoot okay.
Yes.
But it's a completely different thing if you're shooting with a regular arrow guide because it's not under the arrow. It's only half under the arrow, if that. True. I've seen this is roughly 6.5 millimeters deep.
Yeah.
I've seen references to traditional ones about that size. Modern ones that are partially enclosed are usually almost 8 millimeters deep. So the full depth of the arrow, which means that, as I said before, when the arrow is traveling down there, it is partially out because to adapt to the fact that the walls are higher. So the string cannot push the arrow as straight as with one of these. It's pushing it at an angle like that. So when the arrow leaves, it has to straighten out. Whereas with this one, it hardly has to straighten out at all. And I've used high-speed photography to confirm that. Plus my only invention really was to get a post-it note and stick it on the end of the guide, then get a pencil and draw the outline of the thing and then shoot it. And when you picked up the paper, the hole was always touching the outline. The arrow didn't move away from the guide, which suggests that's the way it should be done.
Okay, Bede. My suggestion is for these overdraw, I mean, the Ottoman style, we will make a separate video on that, okay?
Okay.
And compare it to navak-e qabze. So we thank you also for this review on what you prefer. So we talked about different types and thank you very much for all your insights on that and showing us these beautiful items you made. And if people want to order, they can always order from you, right, Bede?
Oh yeah, yeah. I've got a bit of a backlog at the moment, due to the fact that someone ordered 8 arrow guides. So it's a lot of finishing.
Yes, of course, of course.
But and I like to test them to make sure that they're totally safe. See, with the wooden ones, this is pretty stiff.
Yes, it is.
But until you've tested them, you don't know whether there's not a fault in the wood and it's going to break. So you can't give something to somebody and say, oh, yeah, that's okay, and have it break on them. That's terrible.
Of course, of course. Thank you very much, Bede, for your time. I really appreciate it and hope to see you soon then again on our channel. Thank you. Have a nice day.
You too.